live in a world of about 8 billion people, each of us with different talents, gifts, shapes, sizes, and identities. But in a world where we say that differences bring us together, like a big melting pot, the truth has come to tell us that it is more of a grinder. Now, I see problems every day that divide us and cause real social issues, but it seems to merrily roll along as the same old thing every day. If I recall, and I do, because I looked it up just now, it was James Baldwin who once said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And what we face every day is the issue of differences. More often than not, it seems the difference of gender is what people think has divided us, since, well, any of us can remember. American ideals like us to believe that we are all equally considered in every way. Yet, it kind of left me wondering, if that's true, why is there a wage gap? Why is there still less female hirings in the workforce? They make up half of the population of our entire existence, but there's still a lack of acceptance and understanding. So, in the time I have, I want to find a reasonable answer to a single question. How is gender still affecting life in the adult world? More importantly, the workplace. If there is so much knowledge about this topic, then there has to be answers. It can't just be averted by yours or my eyes. The issue has to be faced, addressed, and solved. Okay. Now, I'm not going to talk about this topic like it's something new that just came off the street. You guys aren't stupid, and we're all smarter than that. Now, a lot of you know the history of how gender roles had been in America in the past. For example, my own grandfather was a construction foreman for 4 decades, while my grandma stayed home to care for the garden, and the house, and breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the family every day. Now, for all intents and purposes, men were the workers and main financial providers, while the women were often expected to stay home and be the main domestic caretakers. And for the record, my grandparents loved their family and each other very much. They were happy with the life they built, along with the roles they played, but it's easy to see that nowadays, and even back then, people want different things to define their lives. That's okay. Coming into modern day, women have earned their place in a lot of new ways and worked their way up a lot of social ladders, but it is still difficult to see that even though times have changed, females are still valued as less than in a work environment. Even in a relationship where both spouses are working and have a child, it's often put on the maternal figure's shoulders to handle the domestic work, and it puts them at a disadvantage as they're now handling twice the workload. Now, most have heard of the wage gaps between men and women in the same line of work, with women making 82% of what men earned. In addition to this, there is the main issue of gender discrimination in the workplace. But despite its name, I wasn't fully sure what gender discrimination fully meant. In the workplace, it is defined by the unfavorable treatment of someone, whether they be an employee or a job applicant, because of their gender. Now, let me preface that I was pretty surprised to learn that workplace gender discrimination is not so black and white as just, "I won't hire you because you're a woman." Blah. Yeah, that would be pretty alienating to most men in the position of employer, as well as men in general. Okay, but in all seriousness, these occurrences do happen, and it's known as direct discrimination. It can be found usually in employers as well as certain coworkers. However, this form is few and far between in comparison to the Goliath, known as indirect discrimination, which is quite a bit more common. Allow me to describe a picture for you, because I can't paint. Now, imagine that you have a job. Good for you. You're making money. However, let's throw a wrench of the monkey variety in there for a second. Let's say that your boss has created a new policy that everyone must follow, no exceptions. Because of scheduling, shifts no longer end at 3, but are now extended to 5. Now, this has an effect on your female coworker who has to pick her child up after school every day at 3. Now, this is a slippery slope because it applies to everyone, but because this woman might be the only one in the workplace with this issue, it could be seen as discrimination because she's a woman. Naturally, when I thought about this, I figured there was no way that something like this could easily slide, but this practice is usually permitted if there's a valid reason for the policy change. And this allowance is known as object justification. Although there is a version of discrimination that goes a broad way across the board. This is known as harassment. Harassment, like all gender discrimination, can occur to any gender, but one type of harassment is based off of protected characteristics such as age, sex, race, gender, or religion. For example, when an employer comments that there is no point in promoting women because they will just go off to have children. Even though he doesn't directly point this towards anyone, a female worker can obviously be worried and offended by this. Now, another much scarier harassment is sexual harassment. Now, this form of harassment is essentially humiliating, offending, or degrading someone by making inappropriate sexual comments, advances, or even sexual assault. The worst part is that sometimes even when reporting issues like these, they never fully come to light, or your work situation actually becomes harder if the person performing the harassment is a higher up employee or the actual boss themselves. It's a form of social structure in the workplace where the culture of male oriented positions are taking advantage of the situation they're in. I'm sure, like many people, this is something that I would help a female coworker with if this came up, but the following information scared me quite a bit. If you are a victim of harassment in the office and one of your coworkers attempts to help you, they can be fired or treated unfairly for helping to oppose those forms of discrimination. This forms a difficult cycle of discrimination and submission where doing the right thing can be badly punished. But even if I know what gender discrimination is, I don't know how this sort of thing can even start. Not all men just simply believe that men are a superior gender in comparison to women. If they did, I would have some bad news to give myself and many close friends of mine, but nevertheless, there has to be something psychologically that is in these guys' heads that is making them behave this way. Something that could potentially happen to anyone. So I have to remind myself that for the longest time, culture dictated that the workforce was primarily for one gender, male. Even today, women only make up 44% in certain industries. It was a long standing status quo of male only. Many male employers, because of ideas of the past, might come to believe that hiring women is a mistake, as they aren't educated enough or qualified enough to be in their working environment. Take into consideration a mother who hasn't worked for some time in order to raise her kids might not have the amount of experience that is required by the male employer, which instead, if we're basing off of qualification, is not true at all. In fact, the number of women outweigh the number of men in universities by 50%, and working women often end up with higher university degrees than men in many parts of the world. And for those who believe that they are better off without female interference, most companies with productivity caused by the cooperation of all genders actually have less tension and increases by 4% in profits when everyone's working together. And more often than not, A lot of the tension also comes from the other male employees, but first, I want you to think about this with me. These employees who might have been at this job longer might have a feeling of superiority because they feel they know more than the new girl. However, accompanying that is also the feeling of inferiority because they feel somewhat threatened by this new person that's doing the same job they are. They might feel scared and they could take their job from them, well, despite their own talent. This job is something that defines this person. If he loses his job to someone with half the experience, what does it say about him? He's scared, so he puts on an aggressive front, refusing any collaboration with who he deems to be the enemy. So, if part of their identity as a male is this job, then it might scare them towards the point of resentment. According to Kwe Mapaya, people live their lives by their identity, which is composed of many unspoken social rules for what is acceptable and expected of them in their culture. So you can see how when these male employees defined as part of their identity is intruded on, they might feel like it's some sort of hostile takeover in their minds, like someone has now changed or broken the rules. It might not justify it, but it begins to rationalize the negative attitude they give their female coworkers. But that still left me wondering about what this all means in the end. Just because I can now explain how the men feel doesn't relieve me of how it must make female employees feel or solve the problem at all. If I was lucky, I could just make a decent debate at a dinner table with someone at Thanksgiving. But that wouldn't be enough to really do anything. When female employees live through this discrimination, it's very hard for them to take it in, as I'm sure it would be for me or literally anybody else. These tactics of discrimination often cause a lot of depression and conflict for these women. When they can, this distress is causing them to take legal action against these issues. Of course, this then creates conflict, which not only affects the female, like I talked about, but the work productivity of the entire company. If this is brought to attention, everyone focuses on the issue and not their tasks at hand. After that, absolutely no one's happy. Also, you may not know it because I haven't told you, and I had to find out to make sure. Gender discrimination in the US is illegal based on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. If legal repercussions reach the company, it'll create a bad image for the company itself because it's now seen as a business that does not respect its workers. And then people might wonder how they, as a customer, could ever be respected. It reflects on the entire system. At the end of the day, this is a big issue. I can't even say that I fit everything in perfectly. That's how big it is. And because it's so big, there is no one size fits all solution to this issue. It took generations to be at a point where we could be unhappy about this situation. Our culture has changed, but not drastically. And people's minds aren't easily hotwired to automatically think a different way. Now, a perfect utopia doesn't exist. And as much as I could talk about it, I don't want that. There has to be conflict so that there's a right and a wrong way of doing things that can be found naturally, but I think a right direction starts with a conversation. Opening up a dialogue between coworkers and employees has to happen, and a discussion has to be had so there's a better understanding of everyone involved on every level. And secondly, the floodgates have to open up, and requirements have to be lowered to accept more qualified females in. If we let go of biases, it can create more productivity, and it's not an all-win scenario, but it comes pretty darn close. Even mandatory seminars where you show male workers the consequences of what it does can help a little. Now, it's not going to reach all of them, but if it can reach a percentage of them, there will be a source of understanding. And at the end of the day, that's all that any of us want, to be understood. I want to be understood. You want to be understood. We all want to be understood. The question is, what are we going to do to get it?